So some of the recent occurrences, we have UFC 247. That was the main event with John Jones and Dominic Reyes. The first fight on that main card was the Derek Lewis and Ilir Latifi fight at the heavyweight. Remember, this card was taking place in Houston, and Houston is where Derek Lewis is from. A lot of people had the opinion. I thought Derek Lewis won the fight anyway, but there are a lot of people that thought that Derek Lewis won that split decision, unanimous decision based off of hometown judging. A lot of people believe Latifi won that fight. Did you guys feel the same way about that, Latifi or Lewis?
I thought that Lewis won the fight personally, but I did see the point and the side where people were leaning towards Latifi winning that fight.
Mm-hmm. Jalen?
I think Lewis won that fight. I think Latifi more just he held kind of like some dominant positions grappling wise, but he didn't really do anything with it. And I feel like Lewis held more of the striking his striking advantage, and he actually did something with it. So I think Lewis won that one.
That's very fair,
but I do see how it could have gone the other way.
Exactly. There's an argument for Latifi in that one. But also, to me, it's always questionable when we have judges that are from the hometown that the fighter is. That always seems like a conflict of interest, at least a little bit.
Just a little bit.
But also later on that card, one of the biggest robberies that a lot of people saw, one of the biggest comments of argument on Twitter and also just everywhere else in the MMA world was that main event with John Jones and Dominic Reyes. A lot of people thought that Dominic Reyes should have won that split decision instead of John Jones winning it. There's still people arguing about it now. And
yeah. What was crazy too, I saw an interesting graphic today. Sorry to kind of cut in there.
No worries.
Dom Reyes, he actually put an interesting graphic on his Instagram 3 days ago. Significant strikes landed against John Jones in his recent title defenses. Take Thiago Santos with 43, Anthony Smith with 36, and Alexander Gustafsson with 22. Once again, these are significant strikes landed. You add all of those up, and it's still less than 116, which is what Dominic Reyes has landed against John Jones. And that's just another area of the fight where I didn't really fully take that in until, it takes a while for you to digest a fight, I feel like.
Especially one like that John Jones and Dominic Reyes fight. That was special.
It was so close. It was so close on every aspect. So sorry to cut you off there, but I just had to get that one in there.
That's a great stat. I honestly didn't realize it was that much of a kind of difference.
Kind of just adding to the controversy, right?
Exactly. That's all that's adding to it. There's a lot of people that I think almost everyone can agree that John Jones won rounds 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. But the biggest argument comes in rounds 1, 2, and 3. I think more specifically that second round is where a lot of the second and third rounds, that's where a lot of the argument comes from. Mm-hmm. And there was obviously some bad judging. If we're talking about at least bad judging, so we can all agree, no matter who the winner was, it was a 48-47 fight. That is something we could all universally agree on. But definitely, the thing that we can't agree on is one judge scoring that fight 48-46.
I think it was 49-46, actually.
49-46. Thank you. That's even worse. What judge sees Dominic Reyes not only losing 4 rounds, but losing one of the rounds 10-8? What were they watching with that one? That really makes me question their eyesight and what they were paying attention to. Like, do you even know where they could have gone that 10-8 round from?
Not at all. It was I mean, the 4th and 5th round, he did kind of just look tired the entire time. But I wouldn't have said it was a 10-8.
No, not at all. Blake, do you see where they might have gone a 10-8 from? Or how could Dominic Reyes not won at least two of the rounds?
Yeah, I don't really see where they got that 10-8 round from. There's no way that I can try and rationalize that decision if that is indeed what they gave. I didn't see the scorecard, so if they did give a 10-8 round, that's news to me. I think that's absolutely ludicrous. There was definitely rounds that the last 2 rounds where Reyes was kind of just running around a little bit, it seemed. that's like as close as you could get to possibly seeing where it could have been looked at as to a domination, but I don't think there was anything close to it being a 10-8 round. There was no way. It was just way too close. There was too many big shots landed by both fighters.
That was one of the most back and forth fights I think John Jones has ever had in his entire career. Maybe more so than the Thiago Santos fight.
Oh, I think looking back on it big time, I think that was way more competitive than the Thiago Santos fight. I think the only fight that really still takes the cake is probably Gus 1.
Yeah.
And that was, of course, probably at least a top 10 fight in the history of the UFC.
But you know what?
Top 5.
To add on to that point, though, what makes that interesting is John Jones, he came out and admitted he didn't take Gus that serious the first time around.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure he took Dom Reyes serious.
I don't know how he couldn't have taken Dominic Reyes seriously.
He didn't come out and say I didn't take him serious. He came out and said I did everything right. I prepared, I exhausted every avenue to get ready for this fight.
Mm-hmm.
And it was still that close. And there's still so many people arguing about the outcome of it. So that's pretty interesting in my eyes.
And honestly, in our podcast, the UFC 247 recap, we did agree that fight deserves, or in our last podcast, episode 24, we did agree that the rematch should be made. Especially if people are still arguing 2 weeks after it happened, they need to make the rematch. That's just a logical thing. But Jalen, your point?
I honestly think that Jones's game plan was kind of one of the reasons that the fight was so close. I think he kind of waited too long. I think he was waiting for Dom to kind of, tire himself out with his big movements. And he ended up waiting to that, second round, he kind of put a little bit more on him. And I do think he won the second round, but he waited way too long and allowed Dom to do way too much. And before he actually turned it on all the way. You could see the difference between his third round and his fourth and fifth round. There was an amazing difference by the way he was fighting. And I think if he puts together a more complete fight, I think that the fight is going to not be to the extreme of how Gustafsson 2 went, but I think he would definitely dominate the fight a lot more if he kind of had a more aggressive game plan.
I agree, but just kind of to get a little more away from that analysis of that fight, more just we can all agree that the judging was bad. And we could all agree that or at least not bad, but at least questionable. A lot of people think it was bad. A lot of people think Dominic Reyes got absolutely robbed of a victory over John Jones. Most recently, the biggest robbery, I think a bigger robbery than that John Jones Dominic Reyes fight, happened Saturday night, UFC Fight Night Auckland in New Zealand. That was the fight between Dan Hooker and Paul Felder, and that did take place in the city of Auckland, where Dan Hooker is from. And this is when Dan Hooker did win a very, very controversial split decision over Paul Felder in a fight where I think Paul Felder, I think it was a 48-47 fight, but I think in those three, I think Paul clearly won that fight. What do you guys think from that one?
I scored that fight in Paul's favor. It was kind of funny. I had it going back and forth pretty much the whole fight. It was round one I gave to Hooker. Felder came back really, really well in the second round, and then so on and so forth. I gave Hooker round 3, Felder round 4, and then Felder I gave round 5. And it's interesting because it seems like the judges, I guess in terms of last night, they must have gave Hooker round 5.
I guess. Do you think it was it that late takedown that ended up giving him the fight? That's
what I was getting to. Is it must have been the takedown, I suppose. But what's weird is, he kind of controlled him, I guess, for maybe 40 some odd seconds, right? Like he had top control. But did he do any damage? Did he really go for any submissions?
No.
That
he
had
got
any
a
chance?
couple of those side body shots in, but that was about it. He did. You gotta give him credit for landing the takedown, but I think they should put less emphasis on getting a takedown and more emphasis on what they did with the takedown.
Right. What I was seeing towards the end of that fight, and specifically in rounds 4 and 5, was Hooker was fading fast. Every shot that Felder landed, you could see him almost start to crumple a little bit.
He was kind of pulling at Dominic Reyes. He was almost visibly running those last 2 rounds.
Yeah, and so I thought in terms of just presence in the octagon, like
octagon control.
And octagon control, exactly, and then just in terms of damage, man, he was landing the heavier shots. Felder was landing the heavier shots more consistently, and
Even
I guess
those
it just
body
depends
shots,
what
yeah,
you
like
score
that one,
takedowns as.
that spinning body kick that he hit late in was it round 5?
Yeah, I
Or
think it was round 4 or 5.
it was round 4, or it might have been round. It was in one of the last 2 rounds, but he landed that flush, and you could see that Dan Hooker was hurt. And I think Paul clearly had that fight, even though it was 3-2 in rounds. I think Paul Felder clearly should have won that fight. Jalen, what did you think of that one? Are you in agreement with us?
Yeah, I definitely had that one going to Felder. It kind of just based off of those last couple of minutes in the fourth and the fifth. It kind of just looked like Felder was more prepared for those championship rounds than Hooker was. I definitely saw a close fight. I definitely think it was a close fight, but I definitely gave 3 rounds to Felder and 2 rounds to Hooker.
See, I think that's the biggest difference between this fight and the John Jones fight is because the internet is so split on the John Jones fight. But if you're looking on Twitter and look at all the UFC comments and all that fun stuff, it is a crap show. And everyone is bad mouthing the UFC because at least it's like 99% of the internet, if we're not talking about Australia or New Zealand, everyone thinks Paul Felder won that fight. And I think
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest things because it was obvious what I was really worried, and my worries came true in that split decision because I was like, it went to the cards and it was a close fight. So I was like, oh no, these judges are really going to give it to the hometown kid, and that's exactly what they did.
Yeah.
And you know what? If we're missing any fights off the top of our head, like
Let
feel
us
free to
know.
chime in on the Twitter link, that we post or something like that,
YouTube comments
and bring up some
or on
fights that we could
Spotify.
talk about on the next episode. Because I mean, this judging controversy, it's not going to go away. In the next week or something. This is going to be an issue probably for a while until the higher powers really sit down and talk about it and get a solution.
Exactly. One of I think the first or one of the few boxing fights I've actually sat down and watched all the way through. I believe this fight was a few years ago. Let's see. No, this fight happened in 2017. So, in July 2017, and that was a boxing fight between Manny Pacquiao and Jeff Horn. This is a fight. It was like a really big ESPN fight, so they marketed the hell out of this. Also, Manny Pacquiao, one of the greatest to ever do it. So, of course, it was a huge fight against an up and comer in Jeff Horn. And this fight took place in Brisbane, Australia, which was Jeff Horn's hometown. And everyone knew that Pacquiao was robbed in this. Jeff Horn was visibly gashed above his eyes, and his eyes were closing. But the judges still gave this fight to Jeff Horn, the hometown kid, and that was one of the biggest robberies I've ever seen in my life.
I remember
Oh
watching
yeah,
that
that was
fight.
that
It
was
made me
terrible.
sick. It made me
Pacquiao was
absolutely sick.
dominating that fight.
Yeah, I mean, there was a
In,
point where
in the
it looked like
stats
he was
too.
gonna quit. It looked like Horn was really gonna quit in that fight, and the referee just gave him another chance for whatever reason.
Is probably hometown ref
That
too.
that was probably the fight in boxing that really made me uninterested, to be honest. Like when I saw
Yes,
that decision, I was just like, well, if the fighter that it clearly is winning is not going to get the decision, then why am I even going to watch this? It's not fun.
see, that's one of the things. One of the reasons why I like MMA so much more than boxing, it most times because boxing to me is one of the most rigged sports I've ever seen. Like noticeably skewed sports.